Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to this edition of Bible Chat Central, led by creator and host of this podcast, Catherine Harmon. And joining in today's conversation is her studio podcast team. Well, good afternoon or good evening. This is D. Lawrence Williams, and this is the 26th episode of our podcast as we're going through the Bible. And we're going to do Exodus chapters 20 through 22. This is part 2 of God coming to Mount Sinai. And the question is, what do we know about God and His holiness? So, with that being said, I want to find out who's in the studio this evening. So I'm actually looking for my daughter, Catherine. Catherine, are you in?
Yes, I just made it in. My call kept dropping for some reason, but I'm in. So,
all right. Oh, doing pretty good. This is something kind of different for us this time, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So, but, part 2, hey, we got to continue. The show has to keep going on. So we definitely want to cover every chapter. So it's unfortunate we didn't get through the last one, but I did enjoy the last episode. There were just some things that, we're hoping people will learn from that one. But again, end of the goal is to keep them encouraged to keep reading. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I think that particular episode 25 should be quite interesting to people, and I think it will accomplish what this podcast is all about. That is really trying to encourage people to go read the Bible for themselves, and if they should be able to figure that out from podcast number 25.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, well, we don't have Brother Glenn in here yet, so we will just do a little bit of overview of what we're about to do. Welcome back again. This is part 2 of episode 25. We're glad that you are following along with us, listeners. So get out those Bibles because we're still going to continue to do 20 through 22. We're just going to finish the last half of 20 because we did cover the first half with our featured guest. Beautiful family, by the way. So that will definitely be posted on the YouTube channel that you could listen to and get the full episode once that's in. So awesome. Thank you again. And let's see here. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open them up. And we will just continue with the 10 Commandments. That's where we left off. We left off on which one? We talked about the name in vain, and then the Sabbath day. But before we go on, did you want to say anything more about those first commandments that we discussed in the last chapter? Did you want to elaborate on anything, or?
No, I think we could probably move on. I think people will kind of get the gist of what, what those commandments are about. But no, let's get on to the next one and be as fluid as we can.
Okay. All right. So moving on, we are now on the verse 12, where it says, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. So, we see this chapter used so much, just kind of more like a Bible thumping type thing over the heads of our children to comply and be obedient to, the parents. But there's just more to it than that. So did you want to go in and explain that?
Well, for one thing, we know that that is when we're looking at these commandments, that's the first one with a promise in it. And it's and like you said, we do tend to take this and we give it to our kids, and of course, I kind of gave it to our mind rather forcefully, but I can look back and see where it has paid off for some of them. So, but it is the first command, and actually it's the only command with the promise. And I think this was particularly for the Jewish people, the Israelites at that time, because of the way God was going to set up the government that he was going to help establish a government for them, because there were some kids who did not obey their parents, and they ended up getting stoned. So that's why I believe that promise is added to that particular commandment.
Gosh, that's just so hard to hear, kids getting stoned. It reminds me of we went in New Orleans. We were visiting in New Orleans, and we went to one of the plantation quarters that they had there just to get the history. And one of them, one of the areas had words from kids, like actual words, like coming from a diary or something like that, of kids who, the type of punishment that they would, experience if they did certain things. And these are like 5 and 6, 7-year-olds, and it was just heartbreaking to see that. So I can't imagine kids getting stoned. But I think this is the first commandment that falls under the second greatest commandment that Jesus gives, which is in Matthew 22:39 through 40. He says, as we talked on the other podcast, the first commandment was to love God with all your heart, mind, and sign. And then the second greatest is to love your neighbor, which he says here. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So this commandment and the next 5 commandments are in direct reference to loving your neighbors as loving yourselves, that Jesus makes so clear in as the second greatest commandment. And God says it here in Exodus, and he also says it again in Ephesians 6:1 and 2. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with the promise, like you said earlier, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy a long life on earth. So, I lost my...
One of the things I wanted to say on this one, Proverbs 30:17 says, the eye that mocks at his father and despises to obey his mother, the ravens of the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagle shall eat it. That speaks to a punishment, not a discipline, but punishment. And a lot of times punishment results in death. Even by today's standards. And this also, there are 2 tables of the 10 Commandments, one pertaining to our responsibility to God, and then table 2 is our responsibility to our neighbor.
Very good. Yeah. So for this particular one, in both verses, God is promising long days or long life for honoring your father and mother. But just to take it a step further, it means that we should esteem their position as being our father and mother in rank. And I say this because, remember, the very first podcast we talked about why we did this show. That was something God dealt with me to say, you need to honor your father. And even though I grew up in a household with the father who raised me, he was making it very clear that I needed to honor you as my father. But the reason why I point that out is because, we really have to have that esteem to their position, because they've lived a long life enough, to drop some wisdom on you, whether they are believers or not. There are some things that you can honor for learning from them. Some of us can learn things from them by godly wisdom. Some of us can learn things by them setting a good example. But we can also learn from them when they set a bad example. So, so far, what we've been reading in the Bible, we can see the many people in the Bible who have done something shady or things, that are not of God. And we can see how God dealt with them, which gives us light to know, you know what, maybe we should not do those things either. So we can learn from the consequences of our parents, because of the decisions that they made.
That's right.
Why we feel their consequences too when we are living in direct contact with them. So no matter if we have parents who set good examples or who have taught us in the Word versus parents who may have made some bad choices, we can honor them because of their rank and what they have shown us good and bad. Because at the end of the day, none of that is going to matter when you are walking under the lordship of Jesus. He makes our path straight,
right.
And we can have love and honor for our parents simply because of the love we have for God. So,
amen.
I just wanted to point that out there. But
that's a good point.
Yeah. So,
very good.
Let's see. We are now on verse 13. You shall not murder. This is a very straightforward command, and it seems to be very obvious, but it can also be a touchy command because, for the obvious reasons, we know that it is completely wrong to kill, but it can be hard for those to see why it is obviously wrong, particularly for those who are for abortion or hard for those who oppose the death penalty. So did you want to, talk about this in detail? About the verse itself. Are you there? Did I lose you? I think I lost you, yes.
Are we there?
Are you there?
Yep, here. Something happened here.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
Boy, these platforms can be really different sometimes, these podcast platforms.
I know. So, it's just like technology, right? You can't always rely
raw
on it.
And unfiltered. So. Raw and unfiltered.
Exactly. All right. Well, I guess anything you wanted to say about the "you shall not murder" commandment?
Yeah, I think you put it pretty well. People will object to the death penalty. They will embrace abortion. And I'm proud to say that I am for the death penalty. I hate abortion, and why is because God is everything that most people today oppose or embrace is something that God opposes, and vice versa. There's no getting around these 10 Commandments, but to murder innocent child, indefensible, to me, that is the absolute worst. And, God have mercy on those. But, God has grace. There are women who have had abortions and they have come to regret it later. But God, through his mercy and his grace, he has forgiven them for that.
Yes.
Many of these women have gone on to be very fruitful in the Lord and have children.
Yes.
So it's not the unforgivable sin, but it is a horrible sin.
Yeah, it really is. And of course, again, God, and we'll read it in the next chapter, but, God knows what's just and not just. He knows our hearts as well. But, I think in this and, really what it boils down to is what is the, oh my goodness, the word that I'm looking for, the actual motive, or not that word, but, when I say he's just, he knows, are we spitefully, is it out of, intentionally to murder, that, so, but, I do see, not only do we see that God had to include this in the Ten Commandments here, but we also see where Jesus says in Matthew 5:2 and 21 and 22, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. To me, it's just that he makes this the sixth commandment. You know, well, what happens on the sixth day when he created, you know, land and animals? He created mankind on earth in his own image. And this is now the sixth commandment. So with this being the sixth commandment, it is a reminder that it is important to know that God is the creator of life and the giver of life.
Right.
He spoke everything into existence. But with mankind, he purposely created them with natural earthly substance and through the power of his breath into mankind's nostrils, it gave him the ability to live. So it is not lawful to kill what God created, because only creation comes from him, and we don't get the right to take that away from him and make it our own right.
That's right. That's right.
But you know, again, it's you know, if it has been done, pretty sure it wasn't done as a murderous action to say, you know, I'm intentionally going to do this, and God does forgive, and you just move on and do what's right, you know, from there. But, yeah, Jesus expounds on it. He magnifies it by saying you can't even kill a person in your heart because you did not create them, but
right.
God did.
Yeah, he's showing us how radically we should deal with sin in our lives when it gets down to our thoughts. You know, we are made in God's image, and the human being has no right to usurp his authority over the life of another person when it comes to murder. You know, we're stepping in God's place when we do those things.
Right, exactly. Okay, so moving on to verse 14, it says, "You shall not commit adultery." Again, this is another obvious one, but one that has been failed over and over, you know, again throughout what we see in the Bible and through the lives of mankind, both physically and spiritually. Why do you think this was so important to God for us to live by, and why do you think it is such a hard command to follow?
Well, I could probably elaborate on this all day, but you know, the one thing that God has given the human being power to do is to procreate. And so the sexual drive that's what it's designed for, but it's designed to take place in marriage. But because it is such a strong thing that God has given us, people tend to satisfy themselves at the expense of other people. And so, again, we're looking at Table 2 of the Commandments, which has to do with how we interface and interact with other people. Sex, the ability to have sex is so strong that people can't control it. They have a hard time controlling it. And you know, especially if you're not a Christian, this doesn't even make any difference. But even Christians have struggled with this particular type of situation. And so it damages people. When it's used outside of marriage, it damages the individual who is doing the perpetrating, and it damages the person that's perpetrated. And so this is why, it's a devastating kind of a sin, especially if it involves somebody else's wife or someone else's husband, and these kind of things are going on. It has destroyed a lot of marriages. It's destroyed a lot of lives. And so it's sexual drive is very powerful and often used in outside of the marriage. And it also brings in illegitimate children into the world, and
it does.
A lot of them don't land in the right place. So it's a very it's a very dangerous kind of sin.
Yeah, and I think it must be truly understood that adultery is a direct corruption of God's creation of a marriage union.
That's right.
He clearly says that the two shall become one flesh, and he has great purposes for that union to fulfill good plans for the earth. Initially, those were the plans, that were supposed to take place on this earth, but Adam and Eve set that example of how sin corrupts creation. So committing adultery is a prime example of going against God's good plans. It is unfortunate that this type of sin happens so often and regularly, and it is one of the biggest sins that Satan entices people to do as a direct act towards God, just like he did with Adam and Eve. So when Jesus addressed this sin in Matthew 5:27 through 28, he says, "You have heard that it was said that you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So he's basically saying, get rid of those, and be unadulterated as I am. I am faithful to you. I am for you, and you are my bride. So I will not let anything come between this union that we have because of the love I have for you. So you should also be doing this for your bride. So make it pure in your heart to stay faithful so you do not commit adultery in any way and act upon it. So, again, Jesus, he's not taking away from this commandment. He's he's building character for us to live
he's actually fleshing it out. And we also have to remember what Jesus says, that we want to treat others like we would want to be treated. And certainly, you don't want, if a person is going around with and having sexual relations with someone else's husband or wife, you can just bet that person wouldn't want somebody having sexual relations with their husband or wife. So
exactly,
these are very serious issues. And what that really amounts to for a person like that is that they're fulfilling their own selfish desires. That's the reason people do these things, because they're fulfilling their own selfish desires.
Right, exactly. Okay, so moving on to the 8th commandment, verse 15, you shall not steal. Is there any eye-opening revelation here that you want to discuss?
There's a whole bunch of reasons people shouldn't steal. Thieves make everything expensive. People don't realize the cascading effect of thievery. Look at what's happening today in the grocery stores and places. They're locking everything up in some of these cities. The retailers call it shrinkage, but they ought to just call it what it is. People are stealing from us. And, when that happens, that stuff has to be replaced, and their insurance has to cover those costs. Who are they going to pass that cost on to? They're going to pass it on to you and I when we go into the store.
Yeah.
Things get expensive because of thieves. Really does.
That's unfortunate. That is unfortunate. But I think the reason why people do steal is because they just don't have enough trust in God. We saw how some of God's chosen people throughout these last chapters that the book, Genesis, and how they have done what they thought was right to try and receive things for themselves, but only to find that God is truly the one who gives all things. So I think it is important to understand that God is our provider, and there is no reason why we need to steal anything or from anyone, especially when they're the ones who worked. We all worked for our things, and God blesses them with us, and he can bless you too. You don't have to steal, so it's a form of not trusting God that he will provide.
Yeah, he allowed the Israelites to take the spoil of the Egyptians, but when he did that, that was a just reprisal against the Egyptians for what had gone on. Now, I'm going to bring up a really sticky subject here, and that is this idea of reparations for slavery. This is a construction. In my mind, people are constructing a way to steal and rob from people who had nothing to do with slavery whatsoever. I mean, maybe their ancestors did, but to come today and construct a way to take things from people who worked hard for it and to give it to people who don't need it, who don't deserve it, actually, because they weren't the ones who were in slavery. This is another form of theft. And, just blatantly taking from those who have and giving it to people who have not forcefully, that is theft. And the Egyptians, God, through his justice, he took from them and gave to the Israelites. But there are people who are trying to make that same argument with reparations. But, God didn't intend for that to be drawn into a precedent, that it should be allowed at any time for any generation. It's wrong. You just can't steal from people, and you can't construct ways to steal from one group of people through the law and give it to another group of people.
Exactly. That's a good point. Okay, so commandment number 9, verse 16, you should not bear false witness against your neighbor. I think what is important to understand that when speaking to or about others, it must be out of truth and love. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So everything Jesus does, it's in pure truth with good intentions and moral, motives. So we should make sure that we love our neighbors in such a way as not to give any falsity to them or about them. So that's I would say that's the only thing that I really got out of that, is trying to understand that commandment.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways we can speak against our neighbors or equivocate against them. There are people who it's their job. I mean, they get up at 3:00 in the morning trying to design ways to deceive their neighbor. And so, if we're speaking unjustly against our neighbor, that's equivalent to slandering them and slandering their reputation. And we all know who the slanderer is the devil. So we end up doing the work of the devil when we are bearing a false witness against our neighbor. I mean, that is just the fruit that you bear when you do that kind of thing. And even Christians, we're guilty of that. We allow ourselves to be used by the devil in order to disparage the reputation of a neighbor, or gossiping. It's just it's another. You can see all these commandments. I mean, the sins that we're speaking of, they're all horrible. They're all horrible sins.
Yeah, and we don't realize it. Because when you think about this, it is referencing things such as gossip, but to the world, that's a normal thing. People talk about people all the time, or they say things to make one person look bad, or, but, it's just, we don't really understand the consequencing effects of that, of who it's affecting, and until something huge happens, but I'm not going to lie. Younger, you gossip, you talk about people and things. But as I got older, now I can't even can't even stand to hear other people talk about other people. Sometimes I got to catch myself because I could easily get into it. I could easily get into the conversation. Easy. Yeah, but it's like, you know what? Wait a minute. There's two sides to a story, and so sometimes I have to catch myself and say, you know what, we don't, let's not talk about this, or I will try to redirect it to something positive about the person or a benefit of the doubt. Let's give this person the benefit of the doubt because of certain situations, but you could easily fall into it. But now it's like I recognize it, it's definitely not something we need to be doing. So,
yeah, well, some people make it a practice. I mean, they make it a practice of endeavoring to raise their own reputation upon the ruin of other people. And, this is an absolute devastating way to destroy your neighbor. And no one ever they don't think about, well, I wouldn't want anybody doing this to me. No, it's full steam ahead. And, what this shows is the depravity of the human being, our sin. I mean, we're sinners by nature. That's why we sin. And so the law is brought forth. What if there was no Ten Commandments? Well, none of this stuff would even matter, right?
Right.
But it mattered to God. So he says, I got to straighten these people out here. Let me tell you. And actually, when he's giving the Ten Commandments, he's telling us exactly who he is.
That's very true. Holy
and the law is,
and righteous.
Yeah, the law is majestic. It is perfect. The law is perfect. Because it shows us what our sins are.
Exactly. So, all right, the last and final one is a big one. Verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. I think I remember a while ago you had a lot to say about this covenant and why it was so important. So I'm going to let you just go ahead and talk about this one because I like I said, I do remember you saying if this one's broken, then go ahead, Dad.
Yeah, no, this is the commandment that if you break this is the easiest commandment in the world to break because we're always looking for something for ourselves, and it doesn't matter where it's at or who has it. We have a tendency to want that, even if it's the reputation of being like someone else. The idea is that we are putting ourselves in opposition to God. In other words, what he gives us, it's enough. We have a tendency not to be satisfied with what he gives us, so we want more. Once we go beyond that, we're into the field of coveting, and then we are at odds with God at that point. So if you break this one, you've broken them all, which tells me that there is no way I can live by any of these commandments in my own strength. It just does not happen. So this is the linchpin commandment right here. This is the one that should tell us all that we need God, and we cannot possibly live this way without him. What I love is this, is that Jesus Christ, these are the laws that he has put out. This is his law. He's the lawgiver. He knew we were going to miss the mark. The beauty is that when he comes into our life, all of these commandments, he's already fulfilled them. He's not only fulfilled them, but he's fulfilled them for us, and he's fulfilled them through us perfectly. I mean, we have the victory in him because he's done all of this for us. It takes the burden out of living. All he's asking us to do is to love him and to love our neighbor. That's all he's asking. He said, if you do this, hey, you fulfill the commandments. Well, he's done it perfectly for us.
Yeah, and like you said, these commandments is a reflection of who he is. So he has ultimately set the example of what that looks like. And he, is the living God of that. So, yeah, being able to live through him, it is the weight of off of our shoulders. Because
it is.
You're right.
Yes. I'm grateful for that. Can you imagine going all day long wondering? I mean, every time you turn around, you've broken a commandment. I mean, every step you take, you cuss somebody out maybe, or you've stolen something, or
somebody. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you've used God's name in vain, or I mean, just think about the horrendous feeling of knowing all day long that you have broken God's commandment and that He is mad at you all the time.
Yes.
Oh, man.
I know.
No way to live.
Thank you, Jesus. Yes.
Thank you,
that
Jesus is right. Amen.
You are right. Every day, all day long, we have broken one of these covenants in some form or fashion. So,
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, when I open my eyes in the morning, laying in my bed, and I get ready to roll out of that bed before my feet hit the floor, I've probably sinned against God 1,500 times.
Yes,
that's just the way it is.
Yeah, just our eyes, things we see, things we watch. I mean, goodness, it goes on. So,
yeah, the things we think. Just imagine the stuff we think all day long. I mean, that alone would cause you to feel guilty. It's like, oh, man, I broke this commandment.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, I mean, to even think about these things, you sin.
Exactly. So, oh my God, yeah. Well, we've got to place these on our hearts so we can live it through Him. So let's see the rest of the chapter, verses starting at verse 18. It's just basically God said what He had to say about the 10 Commandments. The people hear in the last verses, they hear the thundering sounds and lightning strikes and the trumpet to seal the statement, and they got scared. So they tell Moses of their fear, and Moses tells them, don't fear. You don't need to fear because it's just God testing you. So Moses goes to God, and God once again reiterates all that He has said, all that He has commanded. Is there anything, though, 18 through 26 that sticks out that you want to talk about?
Well, the only thing I want to, and I'm actually putting together a sermon on this in terms of who God is. Here's what's wrong with these people here. They are looking and experiencing the holiness of God. And, this is something in this passage that sits as the central theme of both the Old Testament and the New Testament, and that is the holiness of God. When Mary, the mother of Jesus, had learned that she had been chosen to bear God's own son, her song expressed just how holy God is by saying in Luke 1:49 of God, for the mighty one has done great things for me, and holy is his name. So God is so holy that one of his names is holy. But let me just say, holiness, the holiness of God, if you really start to study it, it'll disturb you. And my sermon coming up this month is on the holiness of God. And some of the people that have experienced it, like Abraham, Noah, Moses, Peter, there are a number of people in the Bible who have experienced the presence of God's holiness, and it was terrifying to them. So I think this is what they are afraid of. And people who are unholy, they are uncomfortable with the holiness of God.
Yeah, very uncomfortable. So let's see here. That concludes Exodus 20. And now we can move on to 21. This is just a 30-minute an hour or 90-minute?
No, this is 90. This is 90. You can't get out of it. It's 90.
Okay, I was just checking because I know we had covered some of it in part 1. So, okay. Yeah. So let's see. Exodus 21, in addition to the 10 Commandments, God gives more laws. And in this chapter, it is concerning the Hebrew servants. I would say this, even just for myself, it was hard, but people do not really like to read these types of chapters because it seems odd that God would implement to his laws. But we have to remember what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:11. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So all of these things we are about to read are written for our, for us, for our
right.
admonition. And it's completely written by the Lord. With that, there's this understanding that we can see these verses that God's setting laws on how we are to treat people no matter what their status is. And we also see the punishments for not keeping his expectations. So, I just think people use this chapter out of content, or they're just uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, I think here what we find is he's actually establishing government for his people here. And so he's setting up these ordinances, and when you look at them, they are actually where he takes the Ten Commandments and he breaks it open, takes the Ten Commandments apart, makes it very simple for them to see just what sin looks like to him and what he wants sin to look like to them. I went through this chapter, and there was really only one thing that really stood out to me. I didn't see a whole lot because of the Ten Commandments, but one thing did catch my eye in verse 13. It says, But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint you a place to which he may flee. And he was talking about cities of refuge. But one of the things that caught my attention in this verse is the phrase, but God let him fall into his hand, or this can also be expressed as, but God delivered him, meaning that God is the sovereign Lord over our lives, and it is he alone who is determined from eternity the day of our birth and our death. And it is by his mercy that we're not overcome by others and removed from the land of the living. But as an example of God's sovereignty and judgment, if you look at today, criminals with a long criminal history that have flown under the radar of the judicial system, sometimes those folks are delivered into the hands of others who end up killing them in defense of their own lives or property. And so I see that as I look through this chapter, I see God is laying out the actual consequences for sin. And, when we commit sin, if we commit to it, it'll always take us deeper than, where we want to go. And I think God has broken out the Ten Commandments, broken them down for him and say, look, this is where this is going to lead to if you do these things against your neighbor. So, but anyway, that's pretty much what I picked up out of that chapter overall. Yeah, I mean,
It is pretty self-explanatory. I do think it is an extension of what he's trying to deliver with the Ten Commandments. So let's see here. I got something out of verse 1 through 6, but I'm just going to read it. So now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. But if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. So The first thing that I did notice is the pattern of the 6 and 1 we see throughout the Bible. We saw that God created the earth, and on the 6th day he rests. We see that Noah's boat was stabilized on the 7th year after swirling around for 6. We see the 10th commandment to have a Sabbath day after working for 6 days and rest on the 7th. Here we see 6 years of servitude, and on the 7th year, it is the year of freedom. So I thought that
very
was
good.
Yep. Just again, God showing the importance of having a rest day or year, or just completion, like you said. That 7 means completion. So
very good.
But what else stood out was verse 6, where it's showing the willingness to serve. So it says here that again, if the servant loves his wife, loves his master, his wife, and his children, that he doesn't want to go set free. He wants to stay with his master, and he becomes a servant forever. Well, what is important to understand here is that God delivered the Israelites out of bondage, from the Egyptian laws. But now under the laws of the Lord, there should be a willingness to serve. And that's what I think he's trying to point out here. Before we were believers, we were in bondage to the things of this world. But when we gave our life over to Jesus, we are no longer in bondage to anything except having the desire, the willingness to serve for him. John 15:15 says, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. So this gives us the willingness to, serve our Lord. He doesn't call us servants anymore. He calls us friends. So because of that, now we have this connection to say, I love you, Lord. So I do want to stay in you and serve you. And I think that's the message that I felt like was coming out of those verses.
That's very good, because that's excellent. In fact, because, when we become Christians, when Christ comes into our lives, our desires begin to change. And you know what God honors, what I really love, is what you said. He honors our willingness.
Yeah.
To obey him. I mean,
yes.
He honors our willingness. I mean, to me, that is one of the most freeing. You want to talk about freedom in Christ? He honors our willingness, and you, it doesn't get any better than that. I mean,
right.
The only thing I can think of that's better is the fact that He lives in us, and that the good works that we do, the ones that God accepts, are the works that Christ does in us. And those are the things that we're going to be rewarded for, what He does, not what we do.
Yeah,
but He does the work in us, and then He gives us the rewards, and even counts our willingness in that. He will reward us for the willingness that we have, that He's given. I could go on all day on that. So that's one of the freedoms of being in Christ. I mean, He takes all of the burden. Yeah,
and that just kind of, it just to have something to relate that to. It's like, when we have our kids, right? I know for mine, they have a chore chart. You do this, you get this. You don't do this, you get a consequence, right? But, when they were younger, I had to put those in place. It was on the refrigerator. You go check it to make sure, But as they got older, I don't have to put that in there anymore. Now, what I could say, is that I love, like, especially with me and Jayla, and I'm a single mom. I live at home. I work, and she's, here. I could pay her for the chores, and I try to, but sometimes I don't necessarily always have it right off the bat because I got all the other stuff that I have to pay for. But she's always willing to just do the chores regardless whether I give her something or not. And because
that just
she's
makes
willing
you happy,
to do
doesn't
it, yes, I want to bend over backwards for her. You know?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
What do you want? Whatever you want. You want to go
what
out
can I get you, my dear?
Exactly. Yes, because I'm like, he has this understanding to say, I'm just going to do this. I'm willing to just do this. So I want to do everything for her, and which I do. She doesn't realize it. When she hears this podcast, she'll probably giggle about it. But yes, I let her do so much because of her willingness of what she does. So,
amen.
But yeah, that's
I love
good.
it. I love it.
Yeah. So, continuing on to verses 7 through 11, I'm just going to read it. And if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. And if he does not do these three for her, then she shall go out free without paying money. I just saw this as it's a contractual agreement.
Contractual. Right.
Yeah, contractual agreement. So this was to protect the women and not be considered as property, but to have human rights. So again, like you said, it's just establishing this government. And so here you can see this, having human rights. So if the female servant becomes part of the household, then the man of that household should not diminish her and abuse her by not providing her food, clothing, and marriage rights. Then if he doesn't, she is free from that household. So I just, again, seeing here that God expects even those in slavery to a master to be treated right, but he is now establishing the human rights here. So.
Yeah, and that shows the love of God. I mean, everything that he creates, he takes care of it. And then he passes or he confers upon men to act in the same way, to take care of what God gives them. Because everybody, right now, we're all exactly where God wants us to be, whether it's a good place or not, because he's fulfilling his purpose. But he is teaching us to love others, and even in this, we can see how we need to treat others in the same way we would want to be treated. So God has a very good way of laying that out, because too many, even today, men try to lay hold of women as a piece of property, and God, he's never. That's never his desire to begin with.
Right.
Women were given to men as a helper. And I think it's Timothy tells us that the woman is she's spiritually equal to her husband. There is a covenantal, he's a covenantal head. There's a covenantal order in terms of man being created first, but spiritually, and God gives every last one of his children gifts. So spiritually, the woman is an equal heir of salvation, and so he has no reason to demean her in any way. And we're commanded to love our wives, and women respond to that. Women are really responders, and so a lot of guys miss that. They don't understand that. If you love your wife, she'll respond to you accordingly.
Exactly. Yeah, and I also, something that just kind of stood out too is, the man as the head of the household of these particular verses, where it says, and if he does not do these things for her, these three things for her, then she shall go out free. I almost can see that in the submission unto your husband as unto the Lord. It's something that I talk about, when God commands wives to submit to their husbands as unto the Lord. Well,
right.
we're only obligated to submit to the husband as he is unto the Lord. So that means he is taking care of you. He's taking care of you under the guidelines and the submission of the Lord. But if he's not, we're not in bondage to that. We're not in bondage to submit to evil ways, not, providing right or anything like that. We are only submitted unto the Lord first. And that's what I saw here, where it just, it just kind of reminded me that of, well, this lady, if this were to happen and the man is not providing these things, she is free from that. She does not have to stay there and take that. She doesn't have to stay there and submit under that, without paying money is what it says. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, you have the other situation too, that's pretty prominent today. You have couples, people who are married, and at some point, one of them gets saved. If a woman it gets saved and she's living with an unbeliever, she is still to submit to her husband as to the Lord. However, she's submitting to the Lord first. She's submitting to her husband under the rules of the Lord. So, if he were to try to force her to do something that is against what God says, then she doesn't have to do that. And,
exactly.
And he may ask her to leave, and it's up to her whether she wants to leave or not. But she can't ask him to leave, and vice versa. Same with the husband if he comes under that kind of situation. But God has designed relationships for people to take care of one another, just as we're to emulate God is what we're to do. We're to emulate him.
Yes. Okay, well, verses 12 through 27, this is the explanation of the types of punishment that will take place because of violence. So the violence that he talks about are violent acts such as when a man strikes another man, when a man strikes his mother or father, if a man kidnaps a man and sells him, if there's cursing at his mother or father, beats his male or female servants to death, if men fight another man and hurts a woman with a child and also causes prematurity. So these are all different types of violent acts that God has pointed out that when these things happen, he describes the punishment for them, and most are about the punishment of death. So this is the expansion of the sixth commandment that you shall not kill, and it has its roots from Genesis 9:6, where it says, whoever sheds human blood by humans shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God has made mankind. God is basically saying here that the punishment for killing is death. But what is important to know here is that death is only governed by the sovereignty of God, and that any death that takes place is a punishment that occurred because it was in his righteousness law of killing. Killing was never to be a personal agenda, such as Cain did to Abel. And if killing occurs for personal agendas, then death, that's the punishment. It was because it was a crime. Yeah, it was because it was a crime against God and his law. So I thought that was important to point out.
That's very good. Very good. Excellent.
All right.
So I saw. Let me see. I saw something there. No, I think that's it. I think you covered all that pretty good.
You didn't have anything to elaborate on it?
Not really. No, I think you covered that pretty well. Pretty well. Awesome. I like that.
Okay. Well, let's see. The last bit of the chapter, it's really just. It talks about animal control laws, so.
Here again.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, again, I mean, when God brings something into the world, he takes care of it, and he gives us the rules for taking care of things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's good. There are even laws he put in place for the mistreatment of animals. It's funny, though, because it reminds me recently, I think it was like last week, Jayla asked me a question about animals. She was like, do they go to heaven? And, that's a general question. You hear a lot of people ask that. But I just thought that was funny because I was like, well, God did create animals. He did put them here on earth. And he expects us to not mistreat them. And this is a pure example. But I really didn't know what to say. I didn't know whether to say, yeah, they're all going to be in heaven with us. Or no, I didn't have an answer for that. So I don't know if you can answer that.
It's a question that's asked quite frequently, and I think Solomon makes a slight reference to it in Ecclesiastes. Man dies, his spirit. Man dies, his spirit goes up, and animals die, their spirit goes down. Meaning maybe there are no animals in heaven. It's one of those things that I don't think God has permitted us to know, but I know this conversation, this question came up at our men's Bible study maybe 3 weeks ago, and, my pastor was, he believes that they don't go to heaven. But it's hard because, we get attached to our animal. I have 4 dogs, and, they clamor for my attention. They're good dogs, and, it's funny watching them going out in this heat. They stay out 5 minutes. They're back in the house, and I go in the other room. I come back, and I find one laying on this couch, one on that couch, and, they're just part of the family. And so a lot of people ask those questions, and they get very sad if you say, no, there's not going to be. But we don't know definitively. I don't think the Bible is definitive on that. I think that's just something God hasn't revealed as far as I know anyway. Would I like to see my dogs in heaven? I wouldn't know them if he did put them in heaven.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know me either.
And would they be in a new body?
That's right. So. And I'd be like 15 years old,
Right. But, there is a description of, I don't remember who it is, I think it's Isaiah or somebody saw images in heaven of like lions. You know what I'm saying? Like a lion face, and the other side was, I don't know, I can't remember.
Oh, yeah. He's
what I'm talking about?
He's describing, he's describing angels. These are people who are around the throne of God. Isaiah is confronted with Jesus' holiness in chapter 6, where he says, I'm undone. And the seraphim is only mentioned once in the scriptures. That these are seraphim with 3 wings, 3 sets of wings, 2 that hid their eyes, and 2, they hid their feet. And the feet is an indication of a creature. So he is describing these animals, or these angels rather, as what he saw. Not only that, but you see that, I believe, in the book of Revelation. But they're not animals; they're actually angels. And the other thing too, I like to let people know, human beings are described as all kinds of animals. If you notice in the scriptures. Human beings are described as wild animals in some passages of Scripture because of their behavior. But I haven't found anything that is definitive on whether or not there will be any actual animals, in heaven. So, but even if there were. And God, he's given us new bodies. And I was telling my wife today, I said, God's probably going to make us like 15 years old, something like that. And she said, I think maybe 30, we'll be like 30.
Right.
I go, yeah, well, we could be, but, we might be 15 years old. We might be more like children than we think.
That's too funny, yes. That's too funny. So, yeah.
But even if my dogs were in heaven, they wouldn't know me and I wouldn't know them. So, what the heck? Using them being there. What fun is that?
Too funny. Right. So interesting. All we know is our bodies will be perfect. That's what we know.
That's all we know.
So, yes.
That's all we know.
The age isn't going to matter, yeah. Because that's kind of funny, too, because if you think about it, if we were all going to be teens, my daughter is 15, right now here on Earth, so we're in heaven, and I look like her at 15. Wait a minute. Why do we look the same here? I was your mother, So, but, yeah.
I know somebody will hear this, and they'll swear we're going to be 35,
Right. So too funny, but that day when we will have perfect bodies, what a blessing. So,
oh yeah.
All right. Well, so that ends the chapter with, like I said, God even having ways, laws of how to treat animals. So now we're going to move on to 22, and it just continues to align with the meaning and importance of the 10 Commandments that God gave them. So, let's see. I guess I'll just read it just to start it off like I normally do. Verse 1, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or donkey or sheep, he shall restore double. If a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animals and feeds it in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. Nothing really stood out to me in these verses at all.
Well, what we're actually looking at here is the things that are being done that would impoverish your neighbor. If a thief is caught while breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account. Here's a person that's coming into your house with the intent of impoverishing you, and you kill him. It's like nighttime, and he breaks into your house. Verse 3 goes on to say, but if the sun has risen on him, this is really crazy, there will be blood guiltiness on his account. He shall surely make restitution. If he owns nothing, he shall be sold for his theft. So, if you catch the guy, if you can get him and bring him into the judge, then you're going to try to settle the case. But if what he stole is actually found alive in his possession, whether an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. So God is teaching us the cost. What is the price that other people pay for our sin? This is, again, that second table of the 10 Commandments. And a lot of these things has to do with the livelihood of our neighbor. We're doing things that could impoverish them. So when you get caught, there's a penalty that has to be paid. So now what happened? It's the guy who digs a hole for somebody else and he falls into his own hole. That's what this is all about. He shall surely make restitution. If he owns nothing, he shall be sold for his theft, or he shall pay double. These are all consequences that most people don't expect when they do things to impoverish their neighbors. Right.
Again, just showing the just, of who God is. That God is just. So.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
People say, well, God is love. He's love. He's love. Well, yeah, he's love, but he's just, too. You better watch out.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that is such a misunderstood just, yes, God is love. You're right. But in 1 Corinthians, he talks about that too. We don't rejoice in evil. We rejoice in what's true. And,
that's right.
That's part of love. When you really think of that, he is saying that's part of love, that, we have to hold people accountable when they're not doing something that's just,
that's right.
We have to, because in the truth of who God is, he's not letting things slide. He's not letting bad things, right. He's God. He's good. He's true. So just through his love, everything has to be in alignment with what's true and good. So we, yes, you do have to hold accountable things
that's
that are
right.
evil. And in this case, he's definitely pointing that out. So,
yep, he's absolutely correct.
All right, let's see here. Verses, where did we leave off? Okay, so verses, did you see anything else? Verse 14, let's see, and if a man borrows anything, so anything else for the rest of that segment before we go to 16, verses 16?
No, I didn't have anything in there.
Okay. So verse 16, it's actually, 16 through 19. God is explaining I'm in the wrong. No, actually, I guess I skipped over this. So moral and ceremonial principles. Verse 16, if a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. He who sacrifices to any god except to the Lord, only he shall be utterly destroyed. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress them, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So I guess I just completely skipped over that. I don't know why I have it highlighted, but somehow I skipped over that.
Yeah, the only thing I was able to pull out of that was that really stood out to me was the verse 18 about the sorcerer. You should not allow a sorcerer to live. The question I have is, why isn't a sorcerer allowed to live? What do you think?
Because again, when you think of sorcerers, they're going against what God is, the truth of what God is. They are liars. They're liars, and these, we're even just talking about the sorcerers that Pharaoh had. They are acting like little gods, but they're not.
Yeah. Yeah, witchcraft is not only gives honor to Satan, which is due to God alone, but it also attempts to defy divine providence. They wage war against God's government, and it puts God's work into the hands of the devil. And that's important because for those who are not rooted in God's word enough to know his ways, they are going to assume that God performs good and evil deeds, and out of sheer ignorance, they make him the God of this world. Revelation 21:8 says this, but for the cowardly and the unbelieving, the abominable and the murderers and the immoral persons and the sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. That word sorcerer is the Greek word pharmakos, which we get the word pharmacy from. And so we can see that drugs play a big role in opening people up for to the occult and demonic activity. I also want to add that there are certain games that people play, like the Ouija board, that opens people up to the occult and demonic. My stepdaughter, when she was about 12 years old, she was playing around with the Ouija board. There was a rock that was propping the door. It flew off the floor and hit the window and broke it while they were playing that Ouija board. Of course, she's never played it ever since. But sorcery, I used to participate in that stuff by reading the horoscope every day, years back. Like you said, they're liars. The people who produce these horoscopes are liars. And they mislead people. And, for someone who isn't in the Word, rooted in the Word, they're going to assume that God does these things, these good things and these bad things. And they will attribute that to him, which would be wrong. So, it's there are a lot of Christians that are caught up in reading horoscopes every day, and they need to stop.
Yeah. It's so funny because, I'm in the dating scene right now during this season. And sometimes I do meet people, especially like through social media, like Facebook and things like that. You meet all these different people. But one of the things that they ask right off the bat is like, what is your sign? And it's like, it's the cross, no, I'm kidding. But it to me, I'm like, you don't get to define me by whether I'm an Aries or a Taurus. Like, you don't get to define me by that, because that doesn't define who I am, except for the stubbornness. But I'm kidding. But just in a nutshell, you don't get to define me in that way. And I actually just had a recent conversation with someone about this, and I'm like, why is that important to know? Oh, well, because, I'm more able to read off of seasons. And it's like, well, that's not a season, first of all. But number two, you will have this stereotype of who I am just simply because you're asking me what my sign is. And that's not even getting to know me, So I don't understand why people rely on these things, zodiac signs, and but the more and more that I'm seeing things on social media and interacting with people in that way, I'm starting to pick up, this is what God does when he gives you the spirit of discernment. He makes you fully aware of what do people actually believe in, So the moment I feel like anybody is trying to get that information, or that they're always posting, oh, it's Gemini season or whatever. And it's like, okay, you know what? The spirit of discernment is telling me right now not to get involved with you. So, that's good, because that right there, you're able to protect yourself. And look, I remember the days when I used to ask a woman, what's your sign? And I was so proud of my sign. And I didn't have a clue about life. I didn't have a clue about God. Had no idea I was involving myself in the occult. And this is why in my book, The Power of Babylon Exerted, this is why I point out what Babylon is. Babylon has a lot of shiny objects, and horoscope is one of those shiny objects that the devil uses to lure us into darkness, and with everybody else that's in there. So, but you gave the right response. I mean, that's an excellent response to the question. You're right. Why would you let them define who you are by a stupid horoscope? Based on a zodiac sign. So
Zodiac,
I get that.
Excellent.
Now, going back to your daughter dabbling in with the Ouija board, when we lived in the Philippines, growing up there, I grew up there from when I was like about 8 until about 17. There was a lot of superstition and stuff like that in the Philippines. I was introduced to, the Ouija board and the spirit of the coin, all these little things where you use some type of device that would move. You're claiming that the spirits are moving them. And I do remember that, growing up, me and my best friend, we would do that stuff. And you know, I can only thank God that nothing happened serious to the extent, like you said, that the rock was thrown at. So, yeah, I didn't experience any of that supernatural kind of stuff. Thank God for
Right.
that. But, you know, people say that when you're doing those kind of things, you're opening up the doors for the spirits to come in. What do you think about that?
Mm-hmm.
Are you really opening up?
Yeah, I absolutely. You've opened the door. You've gone through the door, and you know some people will experience a lifetime of harassment, and I'm talking about people who are not Christians. They're mentally imbalanced as a result of that. You know, one thing you mentioned about the superstitions in the Philippines. I remember your mom and I. We went to Alcala, Pangasinan, to stay with our uncle. We were visiting there, and outside the room were these pigs, and man, they just started making all kinds of noise. And I didn't think much of it, but your mother was afraid like it was nobody's business. She said it was a monkakulam, and which is some kind of a spirit that they believed in. But, you know, the amount of superstition that I experienced over there just interacting with the locals was unbelievable. Right. But you know what? And I participated in some of that stuff because I had no idea. No idea that
right.
It's so easy to get into that stuff, especially if you don't know what you're doing. But I think some people open the door to the occult and they are disturbed by it. And but for Christians that get into that, God delivers them from those kind of things with His truth.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, God does deliver them from them. So all it takes, though, is recognition of that, repenting of that,
that's right,
and turning away from it. That's all it takes. It
that's
doesn't
it.
take much. Yeah, you know.
That's
so,
it.
You know, which you know is such a hot topic today about deliverance, right? You know, people are now. You know, there's this big movie that just came out about these pastors delivering evil spirits from people in the audience, you know, and they're making such a big deal about that now to say, no, well, you know, it's kind of like you got to go through these exorcisms to get rid of all the spirits that are dwelling in you and, you know, that you've picked up from childhood and everything like that. What do you think about that?
It's very dangerous for people to engage in that kind of a stuff because this is a presentation, a Babylonian presentation made to people. It's going to get more and more people involved in the occult. There's no way it's going to stop people from being involved in the occult. It's just going to draw more people to it. And this is one of those shiny things in Babylon that people will look at, pick up, and they'll play with it, and they will get caught. There is real demonic activity. Even in the making of that movie, there's real demonic activity behind it, because all of the ideas that are in that movie are from the Prince of Darkness. And he's found a way to expose more people to it. And so more people are going to gravitate to it just out of sheer curiosity and out of sheer ignorance. And then they're going to find themselves very, very uncomfortable with the things that would be. And not only that, it's going to plant stuff into their minds. They're going to be looking for demons everywhere. I mean, you know, this is sad. But you know, it was like The Exorcist that came out when I was in my 20s. You know, a lot of people got interested. I got interested in that.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. That's a scary movie. I was introduced to that by my mom. My mom's the one that showed me that movie. And, yeah, you know, of course, I mean, I still, till this day, I still can't watch it.
Yeah. Poltergeist is another one. I was young in my 30s. I watched Poltergeist 100 times. I won't watch it now.
Yeah.
I know now more about it.
Yeah.
there are evil spirits that God. Remember now, whatever these evil spirits do, we need to understand that God allows them to do it, just like He did with Jannes and Jambres, the magicians of Pharaoh. They couldn't do any of that stuff without God allowing it to happen, without Him permitting them to do it. So, God is going to allow some people to be touched by these things. That's for His own purposes. We don't know what those purposes are, but they exist. And what I say about Satan, he's God's lackey. Everything that he tries to do bad to humanity, God has a way of taking it and bringing good out of it. So that's the hope.
Praise God.
That we have.
Praise God.
Amen.
So, but okay, well, I mean, that sorcerer, that brought conversation because it's all over the place. It's rampant, so.
Yeah.
All right, well, for the rest of the chapter, is there anything else that you want to point out? I don't think I have anything.
The only other thing I have about the orphans and widows, you shall not afflict any widow or orphans. Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do good, seek justice, reprove the ruthless, defend the orphans, plead for the widows. And then James 1:27 says, pure and undefiled religion is in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. And then the last thing is Exodus 22:28. It says, you shall not curse God, nor curse a ruler of your people. Jesus tells us to pray for our rulers, no matter how bad or how unqualified or how good they are or they seem to be. But we also must remember that it is God who brings them into power, and we're to pray for them. So, a lot of correlation between this and the New Testament. A lot. Yeah,
I agree. But I always just wondered, as far as like the widows and the orphans, the fatherless child, why do you think that, why do you think he is so, why is that so important to him? It's a big deal for him, take care of the widows and the fatherless child.
Because they're very vulnerable to people ripping them off, taking everything they have without any compassion whatsoever. They're defenseless. And so I know in our church, we take care of the widows who have no other people to take care of them. But God is concerned about them because they're defenseless, and He defends them. And it's that's what He considers real religion. Real religion.
Wow.
All right. Well, we got about 90 seconds left. You want to wrap it up, daughter?
Yes. So thanks, listeners, for listening to part 2. We've covered it. We will start a new chapter next Sunday, which will be 23, 24, and 25. So if you have any questions or comments, just shoot us an email, BibleChatCentral@gmail.com. Every week on the YouTube channel, Bible Chat Central, a new video comes out. It might be delayed once in a while, but it will be on there. Follow us. You can reach all the way back to Genesis 1 on that channel, as well as some of our other platforms like Facebook. Go to Bible Chat Central. It's on Twitter as well.
Yep.
And then also on, where else? Is that on your platforms?
Well, yeah, you can. Well, that would probably be it. I have a different teaching under a different name on for the podcast, but Twitter, you can find it on Twitter. So join, come on, join on, because people are coming in, they're listening, and you can join them.
Yep. All right. Well, it just keeps growing. Keep passing it on. The Word is so important. The Bible is so important. Just keep passing it on. But anyways,
amen.
You guys have a great day, and thank you, Dad, for doing this part 2 with me. And we will do, God willing, next time.
All right, honey. Good night. God bless you now.
Good. You too. Bye.
Well, this concludes today's edition of Bible Chat Central, and we hope that you were able to find something of value from our Table Talk discussion. co-host and creator of Bible Chat Central, Catherine Harmon, would love to hear from you. So if you have any questions or comments about today's conversation, you can email us at BibleChatCentral@gmail.com. That's BibleChatCentral@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you for tuning in to today's conversation. May God richly bless you.